Hi folks, I hope you've enjoyed the fundamentals of hair retouching course that I just did. In this course, we are going to hit the ground running and we're going to talk about a bunch of intermediate to advanced topics when it comes to hair retouching. So we're going to be doing things like repositioning groups of hair, and then we're also going to be painting in hair uniquely for that specific image. And I'm going to not only teach you one way to do that, I'm going to teach you two ways to do that. And we're also going to be creating custom hair brushes and then applying the perfect sexy settings for that hair brush. So I hope you guys are going to love this course, and definitely stick around to the end because I do have some freebies for you to download. Like always, it wouldn't be a Sherk Pixel course without that. So without further ado, let's get started. So we are going to jump right in to where we left off in our hair fundamentals class. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about repositioning bits or clumps of hair in this section. And so to do that, I call this section my copy, paste, warp section, because that's basically the 3 steps that we need to do in order to take the hair that we have natively in the image and copy and paste it and place it somewhere else. So to start, let's go ahead and choose our lasso tool by choosing this guy, or you can hit L on your keyboard, L as in Larry, to activate your lasso tool. And what we want to do is make a loose selection around these curls. So I'm going to start up here, and then I'm going to come in here, and I'm just going to select these curls and a little bit of the background, and that's a pretty good selection. At this point, I really want to feather the edge of my selection. And some of you may be thinking, well, why didn't you choose the feather option up here? Well, this is going to stay there. Whatever feather you input into this box is going to stay there until you go back and you change it back to 0. So basically, it's not a one-time feather. And that can really screw you up especially when you're a beginner and you're not necessarily checking your tool settings very frequently. So instead, what I'd like to do is I like to leave this feather value at 0, but I will come up to my select menu. I'm going to choose modify, and I'm going to choose feather from the modify menu. That brings up a feather selection box here, which is a one-time change. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 20 pixel feather in, and remember that this is definitely going to change depending on the size of the image that you're working on, but I want a moderate feather around the edge of this selection, so we'll go ahead and click OK, and you can see how that did change my selection a little bit. At this point, what I want to do is hit copy and paste. But instead of just the regular Command or Control C and Command or Control V, what I want to do is I want to paste it into place. And so I really like being in the habit of holding down Shift as you copy and paste. So Shift Command C to copy and Shift Command V to paste. Now, if you are a PC user, that's going to be Shift Control C and Shift Control V. And what Shift Control V does is it actually pastes the pixels that you copied into place, so exactly where they are on the underlying layer. And you can see that here in the 3rd layer that has been created. Let's go ahead and call this extra hair. And now we've done the copy and the paste, so now we need to transform this area. So we can hit Command or Control T on our keyboard to transform this area. And let's go ahead and take the center point and click and drag it and relocate it up here. And then we can come out and tilt and rotate and just make more hair. Isn't that great? You can just add more hair to your image. But you can see there's a couple things that I have issues with. The first is that it's the exact same size and the exact same curls, and so it looks very duplicative to the stuff underneath of it. So one way we can change the size and modify this a little bit more is to choose to warp this layer. And the warp icon is right here. Okay, you can also access the warp icon through coming into, where is it? Oh, here it is. The edit, transform, warp. That's where it is. I like to use the little icons. Go ahead and hit that little icon, and then that's going to allow you to come in, and it's almost as if your layer gets printed on silly putty. All right, I know that sounds kind of weird. So what I'm just trying to do is basically just create more ringlets of hair. And you know, you want to get it 80% of the way there. It doesn't have to be perfect. But also, at the same time as I'm repositioning this into place using the warp, I'm also creating diversity in the pixels. So they're not exact duplicates. And so that's going to help make your retouching look a little bit more realistic. Now, there is one issue that I see, and that's that this area at the tip where I copied the hair from is not lining up with the rest of the hair. So one of the new features that's been added to the warp dialog box or the transform area is that you can now add your own splits or crossbars, as I like to call them, to your warp box. So if I go ahead and click here, you can add a horizontal and a vertical. You can add just a vertical, or you can add a horizontal. And so let me just zoom in here. So you can split it and use your own, well, they call it a cross wire. All right, so I hear that. Split and warp vertically, split and warp horizontally. And so that's what I want to do. I want to go ahead and click that. As I hover over this area, you can see that this bar is basically just being created. And now, if I go ahead and click right there, now I can take this area above the crossbar and I can actually modify the area above the crossbar without modifying anything underneath it. So this is really beneficial for custom warp, and it allows you to not necessarily have to go into, for example, puppet warp as much, because you're able to have a little bit more control over the locations in which you are warping your pixels. So I really like that I've been able to do these types of changes. We'll go ahead and accept these changes by hitting the check mark. And there's just one other thing that I want to do, and that's just to clean up this area right here. So we'll add a mask to our extra hair layer, and let's choose the brush tool. We'll make sure that we are on a soft round brush, and we'll make sure that we are painting with black. And let's do an opacity of, let's say, 50%. And I'm just trying to, bring back a little bit of that other curl that was underneath this area. And maybe we'll click back on our layer and we'll go back into transform because I want to bring this down a little bit more. Command or Control T. We'll activate our warp symbol, super warp symbol. And then I want to bring this down just a little bit more. So these curls look a little bit longer. So the more that you modify the copied and pasted elements, the more it's going to look realistic. But I still see a lot of duplicative issues here. You can see this curl looks exactly like this curl, and the same, this curl looks exactly like this curl. What I would do in this situation is I would start to modify the color of the added curls that are basically copies of these curls. And a really good way that you can do that is by using the gradient map that I taught in my fundamentals course about hair retouching. So definitely keep that in mind, and then you could just go over some of the colors here in the added hair, and that would create a lot of difference, and it wouldn't look like just like it was exactly copied from the image already. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So that is your first copy, paste, warp. Copy, paste, warp, okay? So that is gonna be the first little bit of hair that we can add. And if you feel inclined, you could come over here along this edge and clean up this mask a little bit, all right? So you could do that, but for time purposes, I really need to make sure that I am kind of just hitting all of my ducks that I really want to get to. Hitting ducks is probably not the right metaphor, but anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more hair over into this area as well. So we already have this nice soft edged selection of our extra hair. So what we can do is with our extra hair layer selected, we'll just go ahead and duplicate it by hitting Command or Control J. And then what we want to do is we want to flip this so that it's applicable over here on this side of the hair. So we can just hit Command or Control T again to transform it. And then we can either right click or we can control click inside the bounding box and choose Flip Horizontal for this selection. And that is going to flip our hair so that we can click and drag it and just bring it over to the other side of our model. So now I'm just rotating it and tilting it. Ooh, and one thing that I want to do, I like this. Let's go ahead and leave that. We can adjust it later, but I would like to delete this mask. All right, and so there's a couple ways to do that. You can either click and drag the mask to the trash, and then it's going to ask you, to delete it, or it's going to ask you, what do you want to do? Do you want to apply the modifications that the mask is making to the layer or do you want to just completely delete the mask as if it was never there in the first place? And I want to delete the mask as if it was never there in the first place. The other way that you can do that is you can right click or control click on the mask icon in the layer and you can choose delete layer mask. Okay, so we've got our extra hair copy right here. So I need to morph it a little bit more so that it covers up this area here. And that's the area that I'm really trying to get rid of the background shining through. So Command or Control T again, but this time I'm just going to warp it out like this, or not even warp, I'm just going to transform it out like that. And then also just make it a little bit shorter. And then I am going to pay attention to this area right up here and make sure that it is, you know, at least meeting up with the hair around it. So that looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and press OK. At this point, I want to add just a black mask over this, this whole clump of hair. So with my extra hair copy, I want to hold down Option or Alt and click on the mask icon, which is going to hide everything behind a black mask. Now I can go ahead and use my brush tool. I'll make sure that I'm painting with white, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint in this area. If I need to clean up the mask, I can totally do that later, but I want the hair to come over this area here. I'm getting kind of close to the finger. And then I want it to look as if it's just kind of falling behind her shoulder here. All right, now I need to come into this area. Brush using my white, and I'm going to go and paint in the hair in this little triangle of space. Okay, so we are off to a good start, but as you can see, one of the things that I really try and teach beginner retouchers is that you've got to retouch within the constraints of the image. And I know that that seems like a kind of a cerebral comment, but we have some really sharp lines around the edge of the area that I painted this in, but the surrounding area around it is actually soft, right? It's not tack sharp, this area of the image. So what can I do to kind of match the sharpness of this masked area so that it matches the surrounding image? I can use my warp tool. I can use my blur tool right here, my blur tool. And I can come on in, I'll make sure that I do have the mask of the layer selected on my extra hair copy. And then I'm going to get my blur tool, and then I'm just going to paint right along the edges of this mask. And what it's doing is it's blurring the edge of the mask that I created. And it's making it match within the image. So just fixing that tiny little speck area there. Okay, so doesn't that look much better? Doesn't it look much more realistic? All right, I think I need to come in just a little bit here. I'm just painting along this edge with about a 10% brush. All right, and it's not going to be perfect. I want to get the concepts is what I'm trying to teach you guys today. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that hair retouching, I did mention this in the first class, hair retouching can be really forgiving because there are so many duplicative elements in hair naturally that it almost just really lends itself well to copying and pasting and doing all of that kind of stuff. All right, so it can really work to your benefit. All right, so there's our original, and then there's with the added hair. I think we're definitely moving along, and this is looking really, really nice. In our next section, I want to teach you how to create some custom hair brushes, because I have literally been there before where I am painting in single strands of hair at a time. And while that's great if you have 20 hours to work on a retouch, it's really not great if you're at all concerned about your productivity and trying to get images out the door and trying not to spend 24 hours retouching an image. So for that, I'm going to teach you guys how to create a custom hairbrush, which is going to allow you to really, really speed up your retouching time. So the first thing we need to do is create a new document. So the first thing is going to File, we'll choose New, and then now I'm working in Photoshop 2020, and recently Photoshop has allowed you to really increase the amount of size in your that your custom brushes can be. So the maximum size is actually 2500 pixels by 2500 pixels. We will make sure it's an 8-bit just for conversation's sake, and the background color is going to be white. And now I'm going to create this brush. At this point, I want to make sure that my hardness on my brush is all the way up, and I'm just going to create a couple stamped dots. All right, so the first one, I want to make sure that I am painting with black, so I'm going to hit my D key to bring back my default colors. And each one of these dots ultimately at the end is going to represent a strand of hair. So I'm going to click once at 100% opacity with a sharp edge, the hardness all the way up. Then I'm going to vary the size of my radius, the size of my brush, and I'm going to create, maybe let's do 68% opacity and a smaller hair strand. And then let's go even lower in opacity and maybe do a little bit of a bigger strand. And then we'll go back to 100%. We'll make a tiny little one. And then we'll go down to 48 and we'll make a little bit of a bigger circle. Okay, so here is our hairbrush. I know that it seems kind of crazy and it does not look like hair. Just bear with me for a moment. Our next step is going to be to choose Edit and choose Define Brush Preset. Then it's going to ask you, well, what do you want to name this brush? Let's name this brush Hair Brush. Now we're going to go ahead and press OK. And just to show you the next step, I'm going to create a layer with filled with black. Okay, so we've created our brush, right? If we come into our brush section right here, and we come down here, you can see that our hair brush that was created is right there at the bottom of our brushes list. But we're only about half of the way there. And why do I say that we're only half the way there in creating our brush? If I go ahead and I just click here, oops, I need to paint with white. That to me does not look like hair in the slightest. And I'm sure you are right there with me saying, I'm sorry, excuse me, that does not look like hair at all. And that's because while we have created the brush, we have not told Photoshop how the brush should react. And in order to do that, we need to go into Window Brush Settings. And we need to turn on a couple of things. We'll start at the top with Brush Tip Shape. And we need to take our spacing down to 1%, which is going to really choke up the frequency in which Photoshop basically drops the brush onto your canvas. As you take the spacing out, you can see how the dots spread out. And then as you bring your spacing back, you can see how the dots get closer and closer together. So we want that at 1%. The next thing is shape dynamics. We need to turn on shape dynamics and click into this folder. I want to make sure that so let me show you really quickly. So there is our brush at the moment. Now that we have now that we have basically decreased the spacing as much as possible. Well, that's great, but we're not necessarily there just yet. I want to take the size jitter and I want to control it with pen pressure. And you can see immediately that that takes the projection of what the brush is going to look like, and it brings it to a point on each size, depending on how much pressure I apply on my tablet by using my pen. The next thing that I want to do is come over to transfer, and I want to make sure that opacity jitter and flow jitter are both set to pen pressure. If you do not have a Wacom tablet and you are really going to be investing in your retouching capabilities and your work, just go ahead and get one. I use a tiny little one. I use the smallest size that they have, and it will revolutionize the way you retouch. So now that we have all of these settings set, if I go ahead and use my brush to paint, this is starting to look a lot more like strands of hair. And I hope you guys would agree with me, right? We're starting to get that fall off, that wispiness. And then I'm just basically changing the size of my brush as I paint in more strands of hair. Let's save this brush now. We're going to, we don't need to capture the brush size, but we are going to include the tool settings in this new brush, and we're going to call this Hair Brush Realistic. We'll go ahead and press OK. And now if we go back into our brushes, you can see that we have our original hairbrush, and then we have our hairbrush realistic, which started with this, but you can see that it has a little brush setting next to it, which means that this brush has brush settings applied to it. At this point, we can go ahead and delete the first hairbrush because we don't want to get confused and potentially use the wrong one. So we'll go ahead and do that. We've got our hairbrush realistic. I've got some other brushes that I create as well. Catch lights, eyeshadow, iris, lash brushes, all that good stuff. You can make brushes for anything. Let me just show you really quickly. So for the eyebrow brushes that I have a bunch of brushes for different eyebrows. I have a bunch of brushes for different catch lights and hair brushes, you know, very similar to what we're creating now. And anyway, so you can create brushes for almost anything. And I am going to be including this brush for you guys to download after this course is over. So definitely stick around to the end because you want to be able to download this brush with all of its sexy settings, right? All of the sexy settings over here are going to be applied to the brush. So great, we are ready to start painting in hair. So I want to come on over to an image that I created of my daughter, and I want to add some hair wisps to the image. So here's the beginning image, and then just added a bunch more sunflowers in the front and added a little bit of wind to the dress, you know, all of that good stuff. I actually relocated her. Anyway, so we have this image, but I want to add some hair to some flowing hair to show a little bit more of the wind that I tried to create with the dress, the flowing dress. So some people would say, you can just start with an empty layer, okay? And you can just start painting in the strands of hair. That is definitely one really good way to do it. And I'm going to do that on this one, but then in my next example of painting in hair, which is back on our redhead, I'm going to use a different method. So for this one, let's go ahead and start painting in using our hairbrush. By holding Option or Alt, you can go ahead and select a color from your document. So let me start with a little bit of a darker color. But if I were to be painting this way and trying to get realistic hair strokes going out this way, it's kind of putting my wrist and my arm on my tablet in kind of an awkward position. So what I can do is I can hit the R key on my keyboard and I can rotate my canvas. Let me show you. I'm not rotating the layer, I'm just rotating the canvas so that I get a better location for my wrist to sit in as I'm doing this. So now I can go ahead and use my brush tool, and every time, here's the real benefit to creating a brush like this. Every time I brush in a stroke of hair, I am actually adding in 5 different hair strands at a single time. And so that's why, that is literally the reason why I created the brushes in the first place, is to save you time. Because nobody wants to sit here for hours and hours and hours and paint in painstakingly single hairs at the same time. All right, I know because I've literally been there. So I'm coming in, and every time I'm stroking down, there's literally 5 hairs being created. And I can change the size of my brush by using the bracket keys on my keyboard, and I can then go to the tip of the hair and make that tiny bit smaller. And then maybe I can sample another color from the hair, maybe a darker color, come in here and create some dimensional hair strands so that it's multifaceted. Remember our vocab word from our earlier class. And then I'll come over here. Let's add another clump. I wish hair retouching were one of those things that just literally, if you just knew the right things, could be done in a hot second. But unfortunately, it is one of those things that is just going to take you time. But the better that you get at it, the more you're going to love it, and the more you're going to be able to realize how much can actually be worked on and fixed in your images. So I know this is taking a little bit of time, but I think it's important to show you, a good result. If for some reason, if you are seeing a little bit too much of repetitive, the look of repeats within your hair and you don't like it, I mean, let's be honest, hair naturally is going to repeat because they're all strands that come from a similar place. So this is one of the only things that you can retouch and have it look a little bit more natural while still obtaining some of those duplicative elements that I talk about so much. But if for some reason you're kind of unhappy with the fact that this looks kind of too cloney, or I don't know what the right word is, but if you're not liking that you're seeing all of these the same elements over and over again, what you can do is you can come up here and you can actually rotate the brush so that you have a different angle. And so let me just do this. Okay, there's one. And then if I rotate the brush, there's two. So you're able to get two different looks by just changing the value within this window here that has the angle. So it's basically the angle of the brush. All right, so I don't want to stay here all day, but I hope you guys are starting to see what can really, really be done with these hair brushes. And I don't think I gotta hit R again and rotate my canvas. And if you're looking to snap it in any sort of direction, you can hold down your shift key as you are rotating your canvas, and that will snap it back to different angles. So we've got that hair that we added, right? Well, what if we go ahead and we take our extra hair layer, which we should have named at the beginning, and we duplicate it. Command or Control J to duplicate that hair, and then we Command or Control T to transform it, and then we make it look a little bit different. Okay? Or you could take it and you can pull it all the way out. Okay? If you really want a lot of wind, a lot of wind, a little bit of wind, a lot of wind, a little bit of wind. Anyway, so you can go ahead, you can duplicate it, you can transform it, you can warp it. All of those kinds of things are really going to be beneficial when it comes to retouching hair. All right, so if I zoom out just a little bit more, we can see the before and the after. We've got a lot more flow, a lot more whimsy that's been added to the image, just given the fact that the hair is now a little bit more wispy. It's not perfect. I would spend a lot more time on it, but we are definitely getting into the ballpark of what I was looking for. All right, so I did say that I was going to explain another method for doing strands of hair. And in this situation, I want to just give you another method, because it's important to know, like I always say, it's important to know multiple different ways of getting to the same result, because some are going to work better on some images and some are going to work worse on other images. So we're going to, again, start with a new layer. And what I'm going to do differently this time is I'm going to separate the strands of hair from the color of hair. And so I want to start with my brush tool, but I do not want to start with my realistic hair strands brush. I want to just start with a soft round brush because I'm just focusing on the color. So I'm going to hold down Option or Alt. I'm going to get so what I want to do is fill in this hair over here on this side. So I'll hold down Option or Alt, and I'm going to just start with the brightest color, and I'm just going to paint it in over the areas where I want it to be. And then I'm going to sample a little bit of a darker color. I'm going to put that on either side, and I'll sample a darker color from the bottom, and then an even darker color. Well, that seems pretty similar. And then an even darker color, and then we'll come up here. Let's get a darker color up here and the darkest color. So you can see now, if I turn off all my other layers, you can see what I'm left with on this layer one, which we're gonna call added strands. Okay, so we have to take our added strands layer and let's go ahead and blur it, because I want to get rid of those lines that I see in between the different colors. So we'll choose Filter, we're going to choose Blur, and we'll choose Gaussian Blur. Oh, there it is. And I'm going to blur it until I don't see the lines. It's a little bit too much. That seems good. Okay, 19. Now I'm going to hide this behind a black mask by holding down Option or Alt and clicking the Add Layer Mask button. Now is when I use my brush tool. I'm going to use my Hair Brush Realistic. I'm going to make sure that I'm painting on the black mask. And I want to make sure that I'm painting with white. And I'm going to start just painting in those hairs. Now, one of the benefits to using this method is that the hair strands that you paint in are going to have form, meaning they're going to be darker up at the top, and then they're going to be brighter where the curl of the hair is, and then they're going to be darker again at the bottom of the curl. So this would not necessarily be possible using the other method. So you really got to look at your image and figure out what technique is going to work best for the hair that you're trying to add, for example. But as you can see, we have this area here. I think I added some color in there. I'm just going to right click and disable the layer mask for a moment. Yeah, it's there. Okay. So enable layer mask again. Let's add some variation by adding some rotation to my hairbrush. Make sure that I'm painting on the mask with white. And I would be much happier adding in hair this way than adding it in single strand by single strand. So again, my last step on this section has to do, again, the same tip that I had down here in this triangle. You've got to retouch within the constraints of your image. So if we look at the underlying hair, while the color matches, the fact is that the additional hair that we added in is much sharper than the surrounding hair. You can see it here. This is blurry and these strands are sharp. So what we can do is, because our hair strands are on our mask, we can go into the mask properties and we can add a slight feather to the strands of our hair, which is going to make it really blend in with the image a lot more. And if we have this added strands, if we don't think that it's there's enough of the strands, we can take our added strands, Command or Control J, and duplicate those strands so that it's a little bit more full, and then maybe just transform it over and down just a bit. And there we go. So there's that filled in hair and the strands that go along with it. So what have we learned in our class today, the advanced hair retouching course? We learned about adding clumps of hair and making them look realistic. Remember that when it comes to adding clumps of hair, we're going to copy, paste, warp. Copy, paste, warp. That's what we're going to do. And then we added some custom hair strands as well that are multifaceted underneath. And we then took those layers and we added a little bit of a feather to the mask because the strands of hair are on the mask. And then also what we did was we added some flyaway hairs, or some windswept hairs to this image here. They look nice, they look realistic. And then lastly, we created our own hair strand brush. And then we added specific settings to this brush to make sure that it doesn't look like this, and instead it looks like this, to where we are creating realistic looking hair and we're happy with the results. Okay guys, so I know we have covered a lot. Definitely if you started with my introductory class or my fundamentals hair retouching class, and now you've stuck through to the end for the advanced hair retouching class, I hope you've learned something. I like to try and cover as much in my classes as I can, so hopefully you and your knowledge level of Photoshop have fallen somewhere within that path so that you can really learn something from my courses. Again, for my VIP pass holders, you're gonna get a full multi-page PDF to download so that you know exactly what to do every time you have a tough hair situation. And then also, like I mentioned in the course, I want to make sure that you go to sharkpixel.com/store and download that custom brush with all of its sexy settings for you to use for your hair retouching when you have to paint in hair in the future. And while you're on the web, if you want to see more from me or you want to kind of have some Photoshop tips and tricks come up on your Instagram feed, definitely give Shark_Pixel a follow on Instagram. That's all from me. I hope you've enjoyed these segments, and I will see you on the next one.